Hi there. It's a pleasure to be with you today. You heard the BMJ version. Now stay for the JAMA version. Um, Sort of funny as an AI researcher and an editor to stand up and give a talk about AI where there will be no 3D images, not even a heat map anywhere. So forgive me, but what I want to do in the next 10 minutes or so is show you some of our descriptive data from our initial efforts to understand how authors and reviewers for manuscripts in the JAMA Network's 13 journals are disclosing that they use AI. And I should mention that I'm up here on behalf of myself, but also Annette Flanagan, Jake Kendall-Taylor, Mike Berkowitz, and Kirsten Bibbins-Domingo. So this is very much a group effort. You heard from our keynote speaker, among many other things, and from our initial plenary speaker, that our community, the scientific community, the publishing community, is certainly divided about the appropriate role of AI in really all aspects of manuscript preparation, review, I would add editing. In 2023, the JAMA Network added questions requiring disclosure of AI use, both for authors and for peer reviewers, subsequently slightly updated. So we've been collecting this data for about 2 years now. And what I want to show you is, again, really descriptive results to try to understand what people are telling us about their AI use. Now, I should say at the outset, I firmly disbelieve that these sort of tools that purport to identify AI use in text are very reliable. So this is very much a moving target, but I will just say right up front that I believe that voluntary disclosure is probably as good as we're going to get. But as a result, I'm not going to show you any effort at validation because, again, I think we're always going to be playing catch up here. So this, going back to September of 2023, illustrates the proportion of manuscripts where the corresponding author disclosed use of AI. This is across the JAMA network. And you'll see that with the exception of a blip in winter 2024 that I've been scratching my head about, and maybe in the Q&A folks will have some sort of explanation, I do not. But gradually, inexorably over the last 2 years, author use of AI has been increasing. I'm not going to talk about the specific tools because we've observed a shift over time, which won't surprise anyone with the dissemination of large language models and sort of gradual increase in access to these tools. I will show you that there's fair bit of heterogeneity across the 13 journals of the JAMA network in terms of proportion of submissions, with the greatest proportion in our open access journal, JAMA Network Open, followed by JAMA, and JAMA Psychiatry. Not totally clear to me, probably reflects differences in types of manuscripts and in sources of submissions. I will say as an aside, one thing that AI does very well is identifying the journal colors for each of the JAMA Network journals. So a shout out to Claude here for coloring these so nicely to correspond to each journal's livery. And I should disclose I did use AI to help me generate figures because really only computers understand the syntax in R. We also looked by country. We did not in these data look by region. What is somewhat interesting is that doesn't necessarily follow the distribution you might expect in terms of English as the primary language in a given country. But there is a fair amount of variability in country and, again, sort of a work in progress. This was interesting to me. We, similar to BMJ, did not categorize AI use. We provided a free text box, and what we learned, as did those authors, is that when you give people a free text box that's not mandatory, they don't fill it in. So we were left with a collection of free text, and I guess appropriately, Here, I just used a small large language model to try to categorize them into types of use, which was then sort of manually verified. And when I say manually, I mean I sat down and confirmed that the categories appeared to be correct. As in the prior presentation, I think the vast majority disclosed use of AI for language and editing, basically to try to make sure that their grammar, their syntax was correct. I was somewhat surprised at the proportion who said they used it for analysis and statistics. Um, and then content generation and drafting is a little bit generic. But I do think that nearly 12% data analysis and statistics could be as benign as make me a figure, color my figure, figure out how the heck you change the subhead or the axis spacing. But it may be more than that, and that I think is going to be an important area for future investigation, because it tends to be an area where a lot of authors have to rely on outside statistical input that they may not have. So anyway, I would say watch that space. And then food for thought here, we did look at disclosure of AI use by category of manuscript decision. So what was the outcome of that manuscript? Now, a large subset of these were still works in progress, and rather than get into survival analysis and all sorts of complexity, which um, I think might have obscured more than it revealed, we simply treated them as their own categories. So the 4 categories here: was the manuscript ultimately rejected? Was it accepted or asked to revise for acceptance? Was it still pending, or was it withdrawn? Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of JAMA Network per se, so others can talk to withdrawal, but in some cases, it's a circumstance where we identify a problem with the manuscript and ask the authors to withdraw it. In some cases, authors withdraw it themselves. But certainly, I think in a room with so many editors, I would say withdrawn definitely deserves to be in red here, because it is a category that indicates something may be wrong with the manuscript or the circumstances of handling the manuscript. And so it's notable that that was the category where the use of AI disclosed by authors was greatest. But interestingly, rejection was the category where the use of AI was lowest. And I'm going to freelance here and hypothesize that this tool that we're trying to get our minds around is probably a two-edged sword, right? It's a great way to accelerate some of the problems that we face as authors, as editors, but it's also probably a very useful tool for a lot of our authors. And I think that's important to consider, that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. This is actually an eye chart. It's really just to see who in the back of the room can actually read numbers from very far away. But I felt badly not doing at least one regression. What I would say, though, is that really just supports the findings in the descriptive analysis, that in terms of what categories are notably different. What we did find, interestingly, was that things like letters to the editor tended to, and viewpoints, commentaries tended to be among the categories of submissions that used more AI. And I also found interesting there was so much heterogeneity in terms of kinds of articles where people relied on AI. All right, let me switch gears in the last few minutes and talk about peer reviewers, since we are here for the PRC. As I mentioned, beginning in 2023, in the summer, JAMA Network began requiring disclosure. And here I think it's important to carefully parse the question, which first asks, did you use some sort of chatbot or language model or AI tool? And then says, by the way, you're not allowed to do that. So, I think in the end, what we end up with is perhaps more a test of reading comprehension or honesty or willingness to disclose. Nonetheless, this is some of our initial data on what peer reviewers tell us about their use of AI. So I would say that while it may not be measuring precisely the construct that we'd like, it is measuring something about our peer reviewers. And here, thank you, Claude is another color-coded description of reviewer use of AI. Again, you'll see predominantly JAMA Network Open, followed by JAMA Psychiatry. Interestingly here, JAMA is among the lowest. Our flagship journal is among the lowest in terms of the proportion of reviewers who disclose using AI. But I'll also point out these are very modest proportions. And so I think we need to take any differences with a grain of salt. And I personally am somewhat skeptical that 1% or so, or less than 1% of our reviewers are really using AI. I would venture to guess that it's substantially more, probably mostly to check language. But again, this is where I call to your attention that I do not believe that we have good tools to identify AI use. And so I'm skeptical that we're going to get a gold standard here. In terms of countries, you do see a substantial amount of variability. I don't know if it's variability in AI use among reviewers or willingness to disclose, or perhaps reading comprehension. But we do see that source of manuscript is one of the major, or source of, in this case of peer review, one of the major sources of heterogeneity. So are the AI reviews better, or the AI enhanced or augmented reviews better? And here I couldn't help myself. I had to put a p-value on the screen. I apologize, especially to the Bayesians in the audience, and I will just fall back on maybe. So in the JAMA Network, editors are asked to rate peer reviews after we receive them on a scale that goes from excellent, very good, on down to poor. And for purposes of analysis here, I've just lumped them into very good or excellent, and then not in that category. And it is notable that the higher category, the better review category, did numerically represent more AI use. Again, I think that may tell us more about the reviewers than the use of AI, but food for thought here. Again, descriptive, important for further work, but interesting. And had to throw in the eye chart again, a regression model that really just supports what I've just told you in terms of the different categories. So what do you conclude from all this? Well, rates of author use of AI remain modest, but are increasing. Rates of peer reviewer use of AI are difficult to estimate from our data, but if you simply go by the numbers, quite low. We did see among acceptance or non-rejection greater use of AI, but also among withdrawn manuscripts. Again, I think that's something in manuscript submissions that requires more study. Hard to interpret our peer reviewer data, but I think the numeric differences in quality are also food for thought. I will be happy to come back to any of these in the Q&A. 10 minutes is not a lot of time even for descriptive. And I will close by showing you a real world example of a human in the loop. Although when you're flying an airplane, I'm not sure this is the particular human in the loop who you want. So there are many applications of AI in the real world that we take for granted, like autopilots. And my hope is that we'll, as authors, as reviewers, as editors, figure out how best to use this technology. And I hope JAMA's data will help. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's start. Mike on this side of the room in the front.
Hi, I'm Gunter Eisenbach. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Medical Internet Research and also director of the Laboratory for AI and Innovation and Scholarly Communication at the University of Victoria. My hunch is that many authors are actually using AI in the revision process when they respond also to reviewer comments. So the previous presentation by Dr. Al-Fayyad, in the BMJ context, they had that question on AI use in the submission form, right, which would actually not capture these kind of cases. So where in the process did JAMA ask authors about AI use? Also only in the submission form, or is there an opportunity for authors to disclose when they used AI in the revision process?
It's certainly in our submission I don't know if Jake is in the room or Annette to speak to the revision, but I believe submission. I know we capture it at submission, and for purposes of this analysis, use the submission disclosure. I think it's an interesting point. You know, when you get back 5 pages of reviews, it is probably awfully tempting to throw it into a language model and get a summary. And my own bias is that these are useful tools, and I'd like to see us use them responsibly. But I think your hypothesis is likely correct, that it's used more often in revision.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, for me, the conclusion is these results may be a little bit biased and underestimate AI use if we don't put this question in the right place in the submission process, and not only submission process, but also perhaps post acceptance or. So, yeah, thank you.
I also think it's a moving target, right? Thank you. It's a moving target in the sense that from initial submission to revision, even in journals that have a quick turnaround, can be 3 months or longer. And in AI time, as you know, that's an eternity. So I actually think we probably get very different estimates at initial submission and at revision solely because of the slope of the uptake curve. But the point is well taken.
Let's take a question from one of our virtual attendees. Michael?
Yeah, there's a few active chat. Kristen Perry from the Melanoma Institute in Australia is interested in your thoughts on whether the high proportion of authors who report using Gen AI for quote writing and editing could be inflated because it might seem like the most acceptable use case. That is, authors don't want to be overtly dishonest about using AI, but they're diminishing the extent to which they're using it for other categories.
I think that's likely true. You know, authors want to, they want to do the right thing. They also want their manuscript accepted. And so they tend to find a compromise, I would say, and I don't think this is particular to the JAMA network. I think it's unfortunate if we're putting authors in a position where they feel they can't be truthful. And I think it's JAMA just published an editorial in the last week or so about sort of how we are trying to approach use of AI in peer review. And I think my hope is that we can find a place where there are more acceptable uses so people don't feel like they have to not disclose that use.
Let's go to the rear microphone on this side of the room.
Yes, hi, my name is Doreen Valentine from the International Society of Medical Publication Professionals. And my question for you, and it will also be relevant to the BMJ study, is whether there are any differences or trends that you see with industry-sponsored research and the involvement of medical professionals in the submission process versus ones that are not industry-sponsored or not engaged with a professional medical writer.
I think it's an excellent question. We have not looked at that yet. I think this is a first cut of what I suspect will be a work in progress, but it'll be, you know, I would reiterate, one of the challenges is that this is such a moving target. So for example, the reason I didn't show you types of AI used is that our data are completely different from 2 years ago to now, right? And I think that's the other challenge here. It's not just who's using it, but what are they using? How are they using it? We're trying to get our mind around.
Yes, thank you.
Mike, another question from a virtual attendee?
Yeah, there's still a few. Jun Oshiro from Scientific Publications at Mayo Clinic asks if the JAMA Network is developing their own LLM for applying AMA style in manuscript writing. That's probably directed to somebody else in the room.
Yeah, I think that's above my pay grade. A few of my bosses are in the room. I would say this. I think there are a lot of editorial tasks that are amenable to using language models. I think the risk, which we talk about in the editorial, is that these are probabilistic models, and so we can only trust them so far, even the best of them. And so, yes, I think JAMA Network, like other publishers, is looking at how we can responsibly use AI, especially to offload some of the tasks other than things like impact and innovation, where we very strongly believe we need humans in the loop.
Go to the mic in the front on this side, and I think we only have time for one more question, unfortunately, to keep the session on time.
I'm Nihar Shah from the Machine Learning and Computer Science departments at Carnegie Mellon University. And if I understood correctly, in self-reports, about 3% of authors approximately said that they used AI in their manuscripts. And I was very surprised by that. So given the potential of AI to help improve productivity, of course, assuming it's used responsibly, I'm really shocked that 97% are not using Gen AI. So from your survey, like, do you have any insights into why those remaining 97% may not be using Gen AI?
Well, so I think I've made my bias clear that these are useful tools. And if we are, I think there are two problems. One is scaring authors away from using them responsibly. And two is making authors feel like they can't disclose truthfully if they're using it. I also think people are appropriately concerned, particularly about hallucination, which is, as a psychiatrist, I should call it confabulation. I think that is still in a lot of this work something that people are struggling with. So based on being someone at my institution who's trying to teach our investigators to use these tools, I would say hallucinations are a major source of concern for them. I think that's part of it. I also think people don't, the reality is a lot of what you get out is frankly banal and not very good text. And it almost takes more work to teach one of these models to output high quality text than it does to just do it yourself. That is, of course, changing as you know. And I think even a year from now, a talk like this would sound very different. So again, your point is well taken.